17-year-old Zara Mitchell has a deadly secret. She's a trained fighter who once nearly killed someone. Now she's hiding in a new school, hoping to start over. But when Mason Crawford, the school's biggest bully, humiliates her in front of everyone, Zara faces an impossible choice: stay silent and watch others suffer, or reveal the dangerous truth about who she really is. What happens next will shock you. This is the story of a girl who had to fight back. The morning mist clung to Lincoln High's parking lot like a bad memory that wouldn't fade. Zara Mitchell stepped out of her mother's Honda, her sneakers hitting the wet asphalt with a sound that seemed too loud in the October silence. She had been counting again, 47 steps from the car to the main entrance. Counting kept her grounded when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart," Dr. Sarah Mitchell said through the rolled-down window. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, a reminder of the double shifts she'd been pulling at Riverside General Hospital. "This is our fresh start." Zara nodded, forcing her hands to stay loose at her sides. Normal 17-year-old girls didn't walk around with their fists half-clenched, ready for a fight that might never come. Normal girls didn't calculate exit routes when they entered a room, or automatically assess which objects could be used as weapons in an emergency. But Zara hadn't been normal since Detroit. Since the tournament. Since Jake Morrison spent 3 weeks in intensive care because she had thrown one punch too many. The memory hit her like it always did, sudden and sharp. Jake on the mat, blood pooling beneath his head, the referee's whistle shrieking like a wounded animal. The way everyone had looked at her afterward, like she was something dangerous that needed to be contained. The newspaper headlines that followed her family for months: teenage fighter nearly kills opponent. When does self-defense become assault? Zara. Her mother's voice pulled her back to the present. "You okay, honey?" "Yeah, Mom. I'm fine." The lie came easily now, after months of practice. Lincoln High looked like every other suburban school she'd attended. Red brick, wide windows, and the kind of manicured lawn that screamed, safe neighborhood. Zara had learned not to trust appearances. Some of the most dangerous places wore the prettiest masks. Inside, the hallways buzzed with the controlled chaos of first period. Students clutched coffee cups and textbooks, their conversations a mix of weekend gossip and homework complaints. Zara kept her head down, navigating toward her locker by memory of the map she'd studied online the night before. She almost made it. Well, look what we've got here." The voice was deep, confident, and carried that particular tone Zara had learned to recognize, the sound of someone who was used to being obeyed. She looked up to see 3 boys blocking her path to the stairwell. The leader was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of quarterback build that probably made girls giggle in the hallways. His sandy hair was perfectly styled, and his smile had the practiced charm of someone who'd never been told no. "I'm Mason," he said, stepping closer. "Mason Crawford. And you're the new girl everyone's been talking about." Zara's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm Zara. Nice to meet you." The boy to Mason's left, shorter, with nervous energy that made him bounce on his toes, laughed. "Nice to meet you," he mimicked in a high voice. "Did you hear that, Mason? She's nice." "Shut up, Kyle," Mason said without taking his eyes off Zara. "So, Zara, where are you from?" "Detroit." The word came out clipped, automatic. "Detroit," the third boy repeated, drawing out the syllables. He was taller than Kyle but not as imposing as Mason, with the kind of sharp features that probably looked good in yearbook photos. "Big city girl, huh? I'm Jake, by the way." The name hit Zara like a physical blow. Jake. Different last name, different face, but the same casual cruelty in his eyes. For a moment, she was back in Detroit, watching blood spread across the mat, hearing the crowd's horrified silence. "You okay there, Detroit?" Mason's voice cut through her flashback. "You look a little pale." Zara forced herself to breathe. These weren't the same people. This wasn't the same situation. She could handle this. I'm fine. Just trying to get to class. Class can wait, Mason said, leaning against the lockers to block her path more completely. See, we've got this thing here at Lincoln. Call it a welcoming committee. New students, especially ones from big cities who might not understand how things work in a small town, they need guidance. What kind of guidance? The words slipped out before Zara could stop them. Kyle snickered. The expensive kind. Mason shot him a warning look before turning back to Zara. What Kyle means is that protection costs money. Small towns can be dangerous for outsiders who don't know the rules. Accidents happen. Lockers get broken into. Projects disappear right before they're due. But for a small fee, let's say $10 a week, we make sure nothing bad happens to you. $10 a week. $40 a month. Almost $500 for the school year. Zara's mother was already working double shifts to pay for their new apartment and her college applications. The last thing they needed was another expense, especially one that came with threats. But more than the money, it was the tone. The casual assumption that she would comply. The way Mason crowded her space, using his size to intimidate. The way Kyle and Jake flanked him like trained attack dogs. It was everything she'd hoped to leave behind in Detroit. I need to think about it, she said carefully. Smart girl, Mason said, his smile widening. Take your time. You've got until tomorrow to decide. But Zara... He leaned closer, and she could smell his cologne mixed with something sharper, mint gum and the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged. Don't even think about running to the teachers. My dad's on the school board, and Coach Peterson owes my family more favors than you can count. This stays between us. They walked away laughing, their voices echoing off the lockers like gunshots. Zara stood frozen for a moment, her hands trembling with the effort of staying relaxed. She could have ended it right there. One precise strike to Mason's solar plexus would have dropped him instantly. A knee to Kyle's stomach, an elbow to Jake's throat, and it would have been over before they could react. But Jake Morrison's face swam in her vision, pale and still beneath the hospital's fluorescent lights. Her mother's tears. The way her former coach had looked at her, not with pride for her skill, but with fear for what she'd become. No. She'd made a promise. No more fighting. No more violence. She would find another way. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions and syllabi. Teachers smiled and asked the usual questions about where she'd come from and what she hoped to study. Zara gave the same practiced answers, playing the role of the eager new student who was grateful for the opportunity to start fresh. But during lunch, sitting alone at a corner table in the cafeteria, she couldn't stop thinking about Mason's words. Protection money. As if she were some helpless victim who needed their services. As if she couldn't protect herself better than all three of them combined. Mind if I sit here? Zara looked up to see a girl about her own age, with auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun and freckles scattered across her nose like constellations. She was pretty in an understated way, the kind of girl who probably played in the school band or edited the yearbook. Sure, Zara said, grateful for the company. I'm Indy, the girl said, settling into the chair across from her. Indy Parker. I saw what happened with Mason and his crew this morning. Zara's stomach tightened. What about it? Look, I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it. Mason Crawford thinks he owns this school, and maybe he does. His family's got money, connections, all that stuff. Indy unwrapped her sandwich, her movements quick and nervous. But someone should have warned you. Should have told you what you were walking into. And what exactly am I walking into? Indy glanced around the cafeteria, making sure no one was listening. Mason's been running this racket for 2 years now. Started small, just shaking down the obvious targets. Kids who were different, new students, anyone who didn't fit in. But it's gotten worse. Last year, a girl named Rebecca tried to report him to the principal. What happened? Her locker got vandalized. Her car got keyed. Someone spread rumors that she was dealing drugs, and even though it wasn't true, her parents pulled her out of school. She's being homeschooled now. Indy's voice dropped to a whisper. The thing is, Mason's smart about it. He never leaves evidence. Never does anything where teachers can see. And his dad's got enough influence to make problems disappear. Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. How many kids is he doing this to? At least a dozen that I know of. Maybe more. They're all too scared to talk about it. Indy leaned forward, her eyes intense. Look, I don't know you very well, but you seem different. Stronger. Maybe you're the one who can finally stand up to him. I can't, Zara said quickly. Too quickly. Indy frowned. Why not? Because I'm dangerous, Zara thought. Because the last time I stood up to someone, I nearly killed him. Because my mother moved us 3 states away to get me away from the person I become when I fight. I just can't, she repeated. That night, Zara lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her new bedroom. The walls were still bare, boxes stacked in the corners waiting to be unpacked. She'd been putting off making the room feel permanent, as if keeping it temporary would somehow make the move less real. Her phone buzzed with a text from her old coach in Detroit. How's the new school, champ? Staying out of trouble? Marcus Rivera, Coach Rivera, had been like a second father to her for 4 years. He'd taught her discipline, control, the difference between fighting with anger and fighting with purpose. But even he had agreed that leaving Detroit was the right choice after what happened. It's fine, she texted back. Everything's fine. It was another lie, but she was getting good at those. The next morning brought gray skies and the kind of October chill that made everyone walk a little faster. Zara had barely made it through the front doors when Mason and his friends materialized beside her locker. Decision time, Detroit, Mason said without preamble. What's it going to be? Zara looked at him, really looked, and saw something that surprised her. Underneath the swagger and the practiced intimidation, Mason Crawford was afraid. Not of her exactly, but of losing control. Of being exposed. His confidence was a carefully constructed wall, and she could see the cracks in the foundation. No, she said quietly. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Excuse me. Mason's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. I said no. I'm not paying you anything. Kyle laughed, but it sounded forced. I don't think she understands the situation, Mason. Oh, I understand perfectly, Zara said, her voice calm despite the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. You want to intimidate me into giving you money. But I'm not intimidated. Mason's face darkened. You should be. For the rest of the day, Zara waited for retaliation. It came during chemistry class when Kyle accidentally knocked her notebook off the desk, sending her notes scattering across the floor. As she bent to collect them, he stepped on several pages with his muddy boot. Oops, he said loud enough for the teacher to hear. Sorry about that. Between third and fourth period, Jake shoulder-checked her into a wall hard enough to make her books tumble from her arms. Watch where you're going, new girl, he said, loud enough to sound like she'd been the one at fault. By lunch, Zara's patience was wearing thin. The careful control she'd spent months building was starting to crack, and she could feel the familiar heat building in her chest, the anger that had gotten her into trouble in Detroit. She was sitting at the same corner table when Mason approached, flanked by Kyle and Jake plus 3 other boys she didn't recognize. The entire cafeteria seemed to quiet, as if sensing drama. Well, Detroit, Mason said, his voice carrying across the room. I hear you've been having some accidents today. Clumsy girl like you. Maybe you need someone to help you navigate the hallways. I'm fine, thanks, Zara said, not looking up from her sandwich. See, that's where you're wrong. Mason reached over and, in one swift motion, knocked her lunch tray off the table. Hot soup splashed across her jeans, and pieces of fruit scattered across the floor. Now look what happened. Another accident. The cafeteria erupted in nervous laughter and phone cameras. Zara sat there, feeling the soup soaking through her clothes, and something inside her chest began to crack open. She looked up at Mason, at his smug smile and the way he was playing to his audience, and saw Jake Morrison's face from Detroit. Saw every bully who had ever thought someone smaller was an easy target. "You just made a mistake," she said, her voice so quiet it shouldn't have carried across the room. But something in her tone made the laughter die. "What are you going to do about it?" Mason taunted. "Run to mommy? Call the principal." Zara stood up slowly, soup dripping from her jeans. Around them, students held up phones, recording what they expected to be her humiliation. But Zara wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Mason, really seeing him for the first time. He was big, yes. Strong, probably. But he moved like someone who had never been in a real fight, who had gotten by on size and reputation rather than skill. His stance was all wrong. Weight distributed poorly. Hands relaxed because he'd never needed to defend himself. "Meet me after school," she said. "Parking lot behind the gym. Just you and me." Mason's eyebrows shot up. "Are you challenging me to a fight?" "I'm offering you a choice. You can keep this up, keep targeting innocent kids, and I'll make sure everyone sees what you really are. Or you can face me one-on-one. No weapons, no friends, no tricks. If you win, I'll pay your protection money and never bother you again. If I win, you leave me alone and you stop bullying other students." The cafeteria had gone completely silent. Even the lunch staff had stopped what they were doing to listen. Mason looked around at all the expectant faces, at the phone still recording, and Zara could see him calculating. To back down now would destroy his reputation. But to fight a girl, even if he won, he'd be the guy who beat up someone half his size. "Fine," he said finally. "But when I'm done with you, Detroit, you're going to wish you'd kept your mouth shut." Zara spent the rest of the day in a strange kind of calm. Teachers asked if she was feeling all right, if she needed to go to the nurse's office. She assured them she was fine, but inside, she was preparing. Not just physically. Her body remembered the training even after months away, but mentally. She thought about Coach Rivera's voice. "Fighting isn't about anger, Zara. It's about control. It's about knowing exactly how much force to use and when to stop." She thought about Jake Morrison, about the sound his head had made hitting the mat, about the promise she'd made to her mother and herself. But she also thought about Indy's words, about all the other students who were suffering because no one was willing to stand up to Mason Crawford. Sometimes, Coach Rivera had also told her, the only way to stop a bully was to show them what it felt like to be powerless. The parking lot behind the gym was empty at 3:30, the October sun casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Zara arrived first, using the time to stretch and center herself. She wasn't the same girl who had nearly killed Jake Morrison. She was older, more controlled, more aware of her own strength. Mason showed up 5 minutes later, alone as promised. He'd changed out of his school clothes into jeans and a t-shirt that showed off his muscular arms. He looked confident, cocky even. But Zara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Last chance to back out, Detroit," he said, rolling his shoulders. "I've been lifting since I was 12. Wrestling since I was 10. You sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure," Zara said quietly. They faced each other in the center of the lot, about 6 feet apart. Mason was at least 8 inches taller and probably 60 pounds heavier. To any observer, it would have looked like a mismatch. "No rules," Mason said. "Whatever happens, happens. No permanent damage," Zara countered. "We're not trying to kill each other." Mason nodded, then without warning, lunged forward. He was fast for his size. Zara had to give him credit. His right fist came straight at her face with enough force to break her nose. But speed was relative, and Zara had been training against opponents much faster than Mason Crawford. She slipped the punch by inches, feeling the wind from his fist brush her cheek. At the same time, she stepped inside his reach and drove her right fist into his solar plexus, the cluster of nerves just below the ribcage that controlled breathing. The punch was short, precise, and perfectly placed. Mason's eyes went wide as his diaphragm spasmed, his body forgetting how to draw breath. He doubled over, gasping like a fish out of water, and dropped to one knee. "Stay down," Zara said, stepping back. "It's over." But Mason wasn't ready to quit. Still struggling to breathe, he pushed himself to his feet and swung wildly. His fist caught Zara in the shoulder, spinning her around, but the blow lacked power. He was fighting on pure adrenaline now, his technique falling apart. Zara absorbed the hit and flowed with the momentum, using his own force against him. She grabbed his extended arm, pivoted, and threw him over her shoulder in a perfect judo throw. Mason hit the asphalt hard, the impact driving what little breath he'd recovered from his lungs. This time he stayed down. Zara stood over him, breathing hard but controlled. "It's over, Mason. Don't make me hurt you." Mason rolled onto his side, clutching his ribs. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "How?" 4 years of training, Zara said. "Mixed martial arts. I was good at it. Really good. Why didn't you tell anyone?" Zara looked down at him, this boy who had terrorized other students for years, who was now curled up on the ground looking young and scared. "Because I hurt someone. Bad. And I promised myself I'd never fight again unless I had no choice." Mason struggled to sit up, wincing. "So why fight me?" "Because you didn't give me a choice. And because those other kids you're bullying don't have a choice either." Zara crouched down so they were at eye level. "Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, you're going to apologize to everyone in that cafeteria. You're going to stop taking money from other students. And if I hear about you bullying anyone ever again, we'll have another conversation. Understand?" Mason nodded, still too winded to argue. "Good." Zara stood and picked up her backpack. "And Mason? What happened here stays between us. But if you or your friends come after me or anyone else, everyone will know that Mason Crawford got beaten by a girl in about 30 seconds. She walked away, leaving Mason sitting on the asphalt in the gathering dusk. The next morning, Zara arrived at school to find a crowd gathered near her locker. Word had somehow gotten out about the fight, though the details were fuzzy and growing more exaggerated with each telling. Some people said she'd knocked Mason out with one punch. Others claimed she'd used some kind of martial arts weapon. The crowd parted as she approached, and she could feel their eyes on her. Curious, respectful, maybe a little afraid. She opened her locker and pulled out her books, trying to ignore the whispers. "Zara." She turned to see Mason standing behind her. He looked like he'd slept poorly, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually perfect hair disheveled. The crowd around them went silent, waiting to see what would happen. "I wanted to apologize," Mason said, his voice carrying across the hallway, "for what I did yesterday in the cafeteria, and for everything else. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Zara studied his face, looking for signs of deception or resentment. But all she saw was exhaustion and something that might have been relief. "Apology accepted," she said. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere at Lincoln High began to change. Mason kept his word, not just about leaving Zara alone, but about stopping his protection racket entirely. Students who had been paying him for months suddenly found themselves with extra spending money. Kids who had been afraid to walk the halls alone began to hold their heads up. But the changes went deeper than that. Mason himself seemed different, quieter, less aggressive, more thoughtful. Zara occasionally caught him stepping in when he saw younger students being picked on, using his size and reputation to protect rather than intimidate. "You know what's weird?" Indy said one afternoon as they walked to the parking lot together. "I actually think Mason's a better person now than he was before." "People can change," Zara said. "Sometimes they just need the right motivation." Is that what you call getting your butt kicked by someone half your size? Zara laughed despite herself. I prefer to think of it as a learning experience. But even as life at Lincoln High settled into a new normal, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Not in a threatening way, but with curiosity. Students she'd never spoken to would nod to her in the hallways. Teachers seemed to look at her with new respect. The attention made her uncomfortable. She'd come to Lincoln hoping to blend in, to be invisible. Instead, she'd somehow become the girl who stood up to the school bully. It wasn't a reputation she'd wanted, but it was the one she had. The test came 3 weeks later, on a gray November afternoon when Zara was walking home from school. She'd stayed late to make up a chemistry test and was taking her usual route through the small downtown area when she heard shouting from the alley behind Miller's hardware store. She could have kept walking. Should have kept walking. But the voice calling for help was young, scared, and unmistakably female. Zara ducked into the alley and saw 3 older boys, not from Lincoln High, but from the neighboring district, surrounding a girl who couldn't have been more than 14. The girl was backed against a brick wall, clutching her backpack like a shield, while the boys laughed and made crude comments. "Come on, sweetheart," one of them was saying. "Just give us your phone and your wallet, and nobody gets hurt." "I don't have much money," the girl said, her voice shaking. "Then you'll have to pay us back some other way," another boy said, reaching for her. That was enough. "Hey," Zara called out, walking into the alley with her hands visible and non-threatening. "Is there a problem here?" The 3 boys turned to look at her. They were all bigger than she was, probably 17 or 18, with the kind of swagger that came from running in packs and picking on victims who couldn't fight back. "No problem," the apparent leader said. He was tall and lean, with tattoos crawling up his arms and the kind of cold eyes that had seen too much too young. "Just having a conversation with our friend here. Why don't you walk away before you become part of the conversation?" "I think I'll stick around," Zara said calmly. "Make sure everyone's okay." The leader laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you're some kind of hero? This isn't your neighborhood, little girl. This isn't your business. It became my business when you started threatening a kid." The second boy, shorter but stockier, cracked his knuckles. "Maybe we need to teach both of you a lesson about minding your own business." Zara looked at the 3 of them, calculating odds and distances. 3 against 1 wasn't great, especially in a confined space where she couldn't maneuver freely. But the alternative was walking away and leaving a 14-year-old girl to whatever these boys had planned. "Let her go," Zara said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority she'd learned from Coach Rivera. "Take whatever money she has and walk away. Nobody needs to get hurt." "You're right," the leader said, pulling a knife from his pocket. The blade was only about 4 inches long, but it gleamed wickedly in the dim alley light. "Nobody needs to get hurt. But somebody's going to be." The knife changed everything. This wasn't a schoolyard fight or a lesson in standing up to bullies. These boys were dangerous in a way that Mason Crawford had never been. They were older, harder, and they had weapons. But they'd also made a mistake. They'd brought a knife to a fight with someone who had been trained to disarm armed opponents. "Last chance," Zara said, settling into a fighting stance that put her weight on the balls of her feet and her hands in position to block or strike. "Walk away." The leader's response was to lunge forward with the knife aimed at her stomach. Zara moved like water, flowing around the blade and catching the boy's wrist in both hands. She twisted hard, applying pressure to the joint while stepping inside his reach. The knife clattered to the ground as he cried out in pain, and Zara followed up with a knee to his solar plexus that dropped him instantly. The stocky boy charged her from the side, but Zara was already moving. She pivoted and caught him with an elbow to the jaw that sent him stumbling backward into a pile of garbage cans. The third boy, younger than the others and clearly not expecting this level of resistance, started to back away. "This is crazy," he muttered. "Let's get out of here." But the leader was getting back to his feet, his face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "Nobody makes me look like a fool," he snarled, reaching for the knife. Zara was faster. She kicked the weapon away and followed up with a straight punch to his nose that sent blood streaming down his face. He dropped again, this time staying down. "Take your friends and leave," she told the third boy, who was helping the stocky one to his feet. "And if I see any of you bothering kids again, we'll have a much longer conversation." They left, half carrying their leader and muttering threats that nobody believed. Zara turned to the young girl, who was still pressed against the wall with her eyes wide. "Are you okay?" The girl nodded shakily. "How did you do that? You're like my size and there were 3 of them." "Training," Zara said simply. "Come on, let's get you home. Where do you live?" As they walked out of the alley together, Zara felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and regret that came after violence. She'd protected someone who needed protection, but she'd also broken her promise to herself about fighting. The line between necessary force and excessive violence was thinner than most people realized, and she'd spent months afraid of crossing it again. But looking at the girl beside her, safe now, talking animatedly about how cool the fight had been, Zara realized something important. Her strength wasn't a curse to be hidden. It was a responsibility to be managed. The story of the alley fight spread through Lincoln High like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By the time it reached the school newspaper, Zara had supposedly taken on 5 attackers and disarmed them all with her bare hands. Principal Anderson called her into his office on Monday morning, not to punish her but to understand what had happened. Zara told him the truth. All of it, including her background in martial arts and the incident that had brought her family to Lincoln. "Why didn't you tell us about your training when you enrolled?" he asked. "Because I was trying to leave that part of my life behind," Zara said. "I thought if I could just be normal, be invisible, I wouldn't have to deal with situations like this." Principal Anderson leaned back in his chair, studying her with tired eyes. "But situations like this found you anyway." "Yes, sir." "Zara, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Would you be interested in teaching some self-defense classes here at school? We've had requests from parents, especially after what happened downtown. They want their kids to be able to protect themselves." Zara's first instinct was to say no. Teaching meant putting herself in the spotlight, acknowledging the very skills she'd been trying to hide. But then she thought about the girl in the alley, about Mason's victims, about all the students who walked through life afraid because they didn't know how to defend themselves. "What would it involve?" she asked. "Nothing too advanced. Basic situational awareness, how to break free from grabs, when to run versus when to fight. We'd start with a small group, maybe 10 or 15 students, and see how it goes." Zara thought about Coach Rivera, about the discipline and confidence that martial arts had given her before everything went wrong in Detroit. Maybe it was time to stop running from who she was and start using her abilities to help others the way her coach had helped her. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." The first self-defense class met the following Thursday in the school's wrestling room. Zara had expected maybe a dozen students, but nearly 30 showed up, ranging from freshmen who looked barely old enough to drive to seniors who were months away from graduation. "The first thing you need to understand," Zara told them as they sat in a circle on the mats, "is that the best self-defense is avoiding dangerous situations in the first place. Awareness is your most important weapon." She taught them to trust their instincts, to notice when something felt wrong, to recognize the signs of potential predators. She showed them how to carry themselves with confidence, how their posture and body language could make them less attractive targets. "Predators look for easy victims," she explained. "If you walk like you're aware of your surroundings and ready to defend yourself, they'll usually move on to someone else." But she also taught them practical techniques, how to break free from wrist grabs, how to use their keys as weapons, where to strike if they had no choice but to fight. She emphasized control, precision, the importance of using only as much force as necessary. The goal isn't to win a fight, she told them. The goal is to create an opportunity to escape. Hit hard, hit fast, and then run. Mason Crawford showed up to the third class, surprising everyone including Zara. I know what you're thinking, he said when she pulled him aside afterward. Why is the former school bully here? I'm curious, Zara admitted. Mason was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. That day we fought, you could have really hurt me. I mean, really hurt me. But you didn't. You used exactly as much force as you needed to stop me, and then you stopped. I've been thinking about that ever since. And I realized that's what real strength looks like. Not using your power to hurt people, but knowing when not to use it. He met her eyes. I want to learn that kind of control. Over the following months, the self-defense program grew. Word spread beyond Lincoln High, and soon Zara was getting requests to teach classes at other schools in the district. Local newspapers wrote articles about the teenage martial artist who was teaching her peers to protect themselves. College recruiters started calling, offering scholarships for both academics and athletics. But the real measure of success wasn't the media attention or the scholarship offers. It was the change in the students themselves. Kids who had been afraid to walk home alone started taking different routes through town. Girls who had never spoken up in class began raising their hands and voicing their opinions. The school's bullying incidents dropped to almost zero. You know what I think? Indy said one afternoon as they walked to Zara's car after a particularly intense training session. I think you were always meant to end up here. At this school, teaching these classes, helping these kids. You think it was fate? Zara asked, unlocking her car door. I think you're exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do. That night, Zara sat at her desk working on college applications. She'd been accepted to several schools, including a few with prestigious martial arts programs. But as she looked at the acceptance letters, she realized something had changed. She was no longer running from her past or afraid of her future. The girl who had nearly killed Jake Morrison in Detroit was still part of her, but she wasn't the whole story. That girl had been angry, uncontrolled, fighting for the wrong reasons. The woman Zara was becoming fought to protect others, to teach them to protect themselves, to build something better than what she'd found. Her phone buzzed with a text from Coach Rivera. Saw the article in the Detroit Free Press. Proud of you, champ. You found your way. Zara smiled and typed back, thanks, Coach. I finally figured out what I'm fighting for. She closed her laptop and looked around her room. The walls were covered now with photos from her classes, thank you cards from students, newspaper clippings about the program she'd built. This wasn't just a place she was staying temporarily anymore. This was home. Outside her window, Lincoln High sat quiet in the November darkness, but Zara could imagine it as it would be tomorrow, filled with students who walked a little taller, spoke a little louder, and knew a little better how to protect themselves and others. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she left Detroit. It was better. The following spring, Zara was asked to speak at the state conference on school safety. Standing at the podium in front of hundreds of educators and administrators, she told her story. All of it, including the parts she'd rather forget. 3 years ago, I nearly killed another student in a martial arts tournament, she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the confession. I was 17, angry, and I thought strength meant never backing down from a fight. I was wrong. The auditorium was silent, hundreds of faces focused on her with rapt attention. When my family moved to Lincoln, I thought I could leave that person behind. I thought if I hid my abilities, if I made myself small and invisible, I could avoid the violence that seemed to follow me everywhere. Zara paused, looking out at the sea of educators who dealt with troubled students every day. But running from who you are doesn't make you safer. It just makes you afraid. She told them about Mason, about the protection racket that had terrorized students for years while adults remained unaware. She described the moment in the cafeteria when she realized that her silence was enabling the very violence she was trying to avoid. The truth is, we all have power, she continued. Teachers have the power to shape young minds. Parents have the power to guide their children. Students have the power to stand up for each other. The question isn't whether we have power, it's how we choose to use it. The audience erupted in applause, but Zara wasn't finished. I started teaching self-defense classes because I thought I was helping kids protect themselves. But what I learned was that physical techniques are just the beginning. Real self-defense starts with confidence. It starts with knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. It starts with understanding that you have the right to take up space in this world. When she finished speaking, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of educators approached her with questions, requests to bring her program to their schools, and stories of their own students who needed exactly the kind of support she was providing. Dr. Sarah Mitchell watched from the back of the auditorium, tears streaming down her face. This was her daughter, not the angry, frightened girl who had nearly destroyed another child in Detroit, but the confident young woman who had found a way to transform her pain into purpose. That summer, Zara received a call that would change everything. "Is this Zara Mitchell?" The voice on the phone was professional, clipped. "Yes, this is Zara. My name is Detective Ray Harrison with the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about an incident that occurred last week involving several juveniles from the West Side District. Your name came up in our investigation." Zara's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident?" 3 teenagers were arrested for attempted assault and robbery. During questioning, they mentioned a girl who had interfered with their activities several months ago. They described someone matching your description who demonstrated advanced fighting skills. The boys from the alley. Zara had wondered if they'd continued their criminal activities after she'd scared them off. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. Detective Harrison chuckled. "On the contrary, Miss Mitchell. It turns out those 3 boys have been responsible for at least a dozen muggings and assaults over the past year. Your intervention appears to have been the only thing that stopped them from seriously hurting someone." He paused, and when he continued, his tone was more serious. "I'd like to meet with you if you're willing. We're working on a community outreach program, and I think you might be exactly what we're looking for." 2 days later, Zara sat across from Detective Harrison in his office, listening to a proposal that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "We're launching a youth mentorship program," he explained. "The idea is to pair at-risk teenagers with positive role models who can show them alternatives to violence and crime. Someone like you, someone who understands the appeal of fighting but has learned to channel that energy constructively, could make a real difference." "You want me to work with kids who are in trouble with the law?" "Kids who are on the verge of being in trouble," Harrison corrected. "Prevention rather than punishment. Most of these teenagers aren't bad kids. They're just kids who haven't learned better ways to handle their anger and frustration." Zara thought about Mason, about how his whole life had changed after one moment of genuine defeat and honest conversation. How many other kids were out there making the same mistakes she'd made, heading down the same dark path? "I'm interested," she said. The program started small. Just 6 teenagers, all between 14 and 17, all with histories of fighting or aggressive behavior. Zara met with them twice a week in the community center, teaching them the same lessons Coach Rivera had taught her years ago. But these kids were different from her Lincoln High students. They were angrier, more defensive, less willing to trust. Many came from broken homes or had been bounced between foster families. They learned to see the world as hostile and to respond with hostility in return. "This is stupid," muttered Tyler, a 16-year-old who'd been arrested for starting fights at 3 different schools. "You're going to teach us not to fight?" "Lady, fighting is the only thing that's ever worked for me." "I'm not going to teach you not to fight," Zara said calmly. "I'm going to teach you when to fight and when not to fight." There's a difference. She told them about Jake Morrison, about the tournament that had changed everything. She described the weight of nearly killing someone, the guilt that had followed her family across 3 states, the fear that had kept her awake at night for months. Power without control isn't strength, she told them. It's just destruction waiting to happen. Slowly, gradually, some of the kids began to open up. Maria, a 15-year-old who'd been suspended for attacking a girl who'd been bullying her younger brother, admitted that she was tired of being angry all the time. James, 14 and already taller than most adults, confessed that he started fights because he was scared of his own size and what people expected from him. Everyone looks at me and sees a threat, he told the group during one of their sessions. Teachers, store clerks, other kids' parents. I figured if they're going to be afraid of me anyway, I might as well give them a reason. But what if you gave them a different reason? Zara asked. What if when people looked at you, they saw someone they could count on instead of someone they needed to fear? The breakthrough came 3 months into the program. Tyler, the most resistant of the group, had been quiet for several sessions. Finally, during a particularly intense discussion about anger management, he exploded. You don't get it, he shouted, jumping to his feet. You had coaches and parents who cared about you. You had opportunities. Some of us don't get to choose our path, it gets chosen for us. The room went silent. The other kids stared at Tyler, recognizing their own frustration in his words. You're right, Zara said quietly. I don't get it. I've never lived in foster care or worried about where my next meal was coming from. But I do know what it feels like to be so angry that you can't see straight. I know what it's like to hurt someone and not be able to take it back. She stood up and faced Tyler directly. The difference between us isn't our circumstances, Tyler. It's what we choose to do with our anger. You can use it to hurt people, or you can use it to protect them. But that choice is always yours, no matter where you come from. Tyler stared at her for a long moment, his fists clenched, his whole body vibrating with barely contained rage. Then slowly he sat back down. Teach me, he said. By the end of the first year, the pilot program was being hailed as a remarkable success. 5 of the 6 participants had dramatically reduced their incidence of aggressive behavior. Tyler had become a peer mediator at his school. Maria was tutoring younger kids in math. James had joined the school's peer counseling program. The 6th participant, a 17-year-old named Derek who'd been involved with a local gang, had dropped out of the program after 2 months. But even he hadn't been arrested since joining, which Detective Harrison counted as a win. We want to expand the program, Harrison told Zara during their year-end review. Triple the number of participants. Add more locations. Maybe even get state funding. Are you ready for that kind of commitment? Zara looked at the certificates and thank you letters covering the walls of the community center classroom. Each one represented a kid who had learned to see their strength as something to be used for good rather than destruction. I'm ready, she said. That fall, Zara started her senior year at Lincoln High with a full scholarship to Northwestern University's psychology program. She decided to major in adolescent counseling with a minor in criminal justice, planning to eventually get her master's degree in youth rehabilitation. But she also had 3 job offers waiting for her after graduation, 2 from law enforcement agencies who wanted her to develop similar programs in other counties, and 1 from a private foundation that worked with at-risk youth across the Midwest. You know what's funny? Indy said as they sat in the school parking lot after Zara's final self-defense class of the semester. When you first got here, you were trying so hard to be invisible. Now you're probably the most famous person to ever graduate from Lincoln High. Zara laughed. Fame wasn't exactly what I was going for, but it's what you needed. These kids, the ones you're helping, they needed to see that someone like them could make it. They needed to see that having problems doesn't mean you're a problem. As graduation approached, Zara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she'd been a frightened girl running from her own potential for violence. Now she was someone who helped others find constructive outlets for their anger and pain. The night before graduation, her mother knocked on her bedroom door. "Can I come in?" "Of course, Mom." Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat on the edge of Zara's bed, looking around at the room that had become a shrine to her daughter's work. Photos of students, newspaper clippings, awards, and certificates from various organizations, all testament to the young woman Zara had become. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said quietly. "For what?" "For asking you to hide who you were. When we moved here, I was so afraid that your fighting would follow us, that you'd get in trouble again. I thought if we just pretended that part of you didn't exist, we could start over." Zara reached for her mother's hand. "You were protecting me. I was trying to protect you. But what I was really doing was asking you to deny the very thing that makes you special. Your strength, your ability to stand up for others. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. I had to learn how to control it first," Zara said. "You were right to be worried. I was dangerous. You were untrained. There's a difference." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "Look what you've accomplished here. Look at the lives you've changed. That's who you really are, sweetheart. Not the girl who made a mistake in Detroit, but the woman who figured out how to make that mistake meaningful." Graduation day dawned bright and clear. Zara sat with her classmates in the football stadium, listening to speeches about the future and the importance of following your dreams. When her name was called as valedictorian, the cheers were deafening. But the moment that meant the most came after the ceremony, when Tyler approached her in the parking lot. "Hey, Miss Mitchell," he said, using the formal address he'd never quite dropped from their counseling sessions. "Hey yourself. What are you doing here? This isn't your graduation." Tyler grinned, and for a moment he looked like the kid he should have been all along, confident, happy, at peace with himself. "I wanted to thank you. And to tell you something." "What's that?" "I got accepted to community college. Full scholarship. And they want me to help with their peer counseling program." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. "Tyler, that's incredible. It's because of what you taught me. About using my strength to help people instead of hurt them. About being the person I want to be instead of the person everyone expects me to be." They hugged, this unlikely pair who had found something in each other that neither had expected, hope. As Zara drove home that evening, her diploma on the passenger seat and her phone buzzing with congratulations texts, she thought about the path that had led her here. Every mistake, every victory, every moment of doubt, and every breakthrough had been necessary. She'd had to lose herself in Detroit to find herself in Lincoln. Her phone rang, displaying Coach Rivera's number. "Congratulations, champ," his familiar voice said when she answered. "I saw the article in the paper. Valedictorian and Youth Counselor of the Year. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Coach. I couldn't have done any of this without what you taught me. I taught you how to fight, Zara. You figured out what to fight for all by yourself." That night, Zara sat in her backyard looking up at the stars and thinking about the future. Northwestern was waiting, and after that, a career helping kids who reminded her of the angry, lost person she'd once been. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she left Detroit, but it was the life she was meant to live. Her mother joined her on the porch, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Ready for the next adventure?" Sarah asked. "Ready," Zara said, accepting the warm cup and leaning back in her chair. "But you know what? I think the best parts are just beginning." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the house behind them, Zara's phone buzzed with another message from another kid who needed to know that they weren't alone, that their anger could become their strength, and that everyone deserved a chance to become the hero of their own story. The girl who had once been afraid of her own power had learned the most important lesson of all. True strength isn't about the ability to hurt others. It's about the wisdom to protect them, the courage to stand up for what's right, and the compassion to help others find their own path from darkness into light. And in that truth, Zara had found not just her purpose, but her peace. The end. If you enjoyed the story, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. It just takes 2 seconds of your time, but it makes my day. Thanks for watching. See you in next video.